Hi, I'm Bob Pollock from Penn State Extension, and this is Dan Yarnick from Yarnick's Farm and Country Market.
Hi.
And we're out in the field today. We're going to talk a little bit about vegetables and some of the things, how to grow them, and also some of the problems that we might find when we're growing these crops in our gardens. Dan and I are in the field in a planting of tomatoes. You can see that these were planted in a single row. They are tomato transplants. And these will be regular full-size round garden tomatoes.
Round slicing tomatoes.
All right, these plants. That's right. They're grown on raised beds, black plastic, and there's trickle irrigation line running underneath that'll give them constant food and water as the season progresses. Do you want to tell us what variety this is?
This is a new variety, Bob, that I tried. It's called Primo Red. It's a semi-early tomato. With a lot of disease resistance, crack resistance. It's good for eating and also good for shipping.
Very good. And you notice he mentioned the word disease resistance. And that's one of the things you want to look for when you purchase tomato plants. It's good to know the name of the variety because all varieties are named, and then you can look up and see what kind of resistance they have to certain diseases, as well as some of the viruses. An example of that would be a tomato variety that would have the name and then it would say VFN after it. And that would mean that it was resistant to certain viruses, is what the V stands for, F for Fusarium, and then N for nematodes. So those labelings are out there, and we want to pick the best plants that we can to minimize the problems we might have when we're growing them in the garden.
Yeah, and also you want to start off with a nice, not a real tall, nice short, green, stocky transplant is a lot better than to get a tall, weak one. They just don't grow as well. They suffer transplanting shock a lot, and so a smaller plant is really a lot better than a really big plant.
And if the plant is a little bit tall, one of the great things about a tomato plant is you can plant it deeper than what the soil line was on that transplant for the root ball. You can actually plant and bury a little bit of the stem because they do have the ability to send out roots there. So that's an advantage of a tomato plant over some other plants that, like a pepper plant, you need to plant that at the same level as where the soil line is on the root ball.
Yeah, it's very good to get more roots too, because if you have a dry season, the more roots you have, the better.
Well, one of the things, that's right.
Excuse me.
Dan's going to explain a little bit about some of the first cultural practices that you can do. These tomatoes are going to be staked. They're not going to just let them lay out over the ground, but these are going to be trained so that they go up, and that keeps the plants off the ground. We tend to have more disease problems. If the plant's laying here and the tomatoes are touching the soil, then we're probably going to run into early blight much quicker, as well as some rot, and then some other rodents can attack that can come right up around the soil line.
Sure. We like to stake. The tomatoes stay clean, and don't, as Bob said, you don't get the diseases, the rots, the mice chewing holes in them. We also do on all of our fields. We use the removal of the suckers, and the sucker this is your main stem, and then this is your leaf, and then the sucker always grows between the stem and the leaf, and you can leave this on and it will grow out and also make fruit eventually. But for the system we're using for staking, and we want to increase the size of the fruit, we remove about the first 5 suckers, and all you have to do is they're grown right here, and a lot of people confuse the leaf stem with a sucker, but it's really this little thing in here, and they call it a sucker because it is going to rob from the plant later on in life.
It's almost like a second branch coming out.
Yeah, so we remove those, and then we only take the first 5 and then we let it go, and what we're doing here is we stake. We're using the Florida weave, where we put the 2 double stakes at the beginning, and then every 2 plants we put a stake, and then we wrap a string around. We make a circle. We put a string on each side of the plant, and then it encases the plant so it can't fall over, And then as the plant grows up to another 6 inches, 5 inches, 6 inches, 8 inches, we put another set of strings. As it keeps growing, we just go around with strings. And it's a lot easier way to stake your garden is trying to tie each plant by itself, and it stays in stakes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's a technique that you can use in the garden to save space too.
Sure.
So
sure. But it's really good too for disease because your plants are getting a lot of air through them. If they're laying in one pile, then they have a tendency to blight a lot quicker.
And that's right. And probably one of the most common diseases that we'll see on tomatoes is called early blight. And that's a fungus. And it always starts on the oldest leaves. So it'll start at the bottom of the plant and it'll work its way up. But you'll start and you'll get some spots on the foliage on the bottom, and then the leaves will turn yellow, and then eventually you'll get some gray spots that have concentric circles in them, and then eventually that whole bottom leaf will die. And that comes from, and that's right, it moves up the plant. And what happens is the bare soil, the fungus will survive in the soil, and so when it rains or when you water the plant, that splashes little bits of soil up onto the foliage, and that's how those first infections start. So anything we can do to minimize and keep the plant away from the soil and that splashing water is going to be a benefit for the plant.
And also a lot of the diseases, Bob, the dew in the mornings, if the water remains on a leaf too long, then it has a chance to go into the plant.
That's right.
The different viruses and funguses.
That's right. The wetting period is very important. So it doesn't have to be rainfall. It can also be the dew that happens overnight. And that's one of the reasons why we don't want to water the garden in the evening. Some people come out with the hose and they water the garden at night, and then that keeps the foliage wet all night long. And if the fungus spores are there, that allows enough time for them to be able to germinate. So we want to water the roots and keep the plant dry.
Either water in the morning if you can.
Early morning.
Or use drip irrigation. Then you don't have to water the foliage and it stays a lot healthier.
So those are some good tips on growing tomatoes in your garden.